Welcome back to the Evil Bad Book Club. This is the chapter that YouTube seems to censor the most. It's been taken down several times from my channel, and I've put it back up after the strikes come off each time. I've changed it as far as I've bleeped out some words. Hopefully, they'll leave it up this time for us. I've taken photos of the pages that this concerns so that you may read them yourselves and you will know what you're missing out on. Thank you and enjoy this chapter. Chapter 21, July 11th, 1994. Busy day! We've got some electrical power coming back into the area now from one of the hydroelectric plants up north, but not much. Electricity has to be strictly rationed, and I spent all the day mapping out the sections of the metropolitan area which were to be energized, and then dispatching teams to cut or switch out power lines and reconnect others. Later, if the rationing is successful, we may also provide power to some other sections. Last night, I found out why Washington hasn't tried to send troops in here from other parts of the country. It's because we've got Vandenberg Air Force Base and all the missile silos there. For the first 48 hours after our Monday morning attack last week, the system was in such a panic and the military situation was so uncertain that no major troop movements were possible. Although we were spread so thin that was no hope of seizing and holding territory anywhere except here on the West Coast. We did create an enormous amount of disruption, disorder, and confusion everywhere. Our people inside the military in other parts of the country had been instructed to carry out actions calculated to temporarily paralyze their units. This involved some sabotage, arson, and demolition, but to a much greater extent, it involved selective shootings. In units with a high quota, our people shot down at random, shouting slogans such as, with the deliberate intention of provoking a action. This was followed up by the same tactic we used here so successfully, seizing radio stations and broadcasting spurious calls to turn their guns against their workers. In other units, communications centers were seized and messages sent which created the false impression that the units had come over to us. On top of all of that, we wreaked real havoc on the civilian population. Power plants, communication facilities, dams, key highway interchanges, tank farms, gas pipelines, and everything else that could be blown up or burned down was hit Monday morning in an all-out effort all across the country to cause civilian panic and to keep the system temporarily occupied with the attendant problems. I also learned that, along with everything else, the raid on the Evanston project took place Monday morning. I was immensely pleased to hear that it was a complete success. So the net result was that by the time the system had assessed the situation and had regained enough confidence in the loyalty of any of its military units to try to move against us, we had finished mopping up Vandenberg and had issued our ultimatum. Any military move against us would result in our launching nuclear missiles targeted on New York City and Tel Aviv. And that's why things have been so quiet for the last few days. And now I understand Revolutionary Command's whole strategy, which had eluded me for so long and caused me so many misgivings. RC realized all along that there was no way with our present numbers that we would sustain a military assault against the system on a large enough scale for a long enough time to bring it down. We could have continued our guerrilla campaign of economic sabotage and psychological warfare for quite a while, of course, but time was ultimately on the side of the system. Unless we could make some really dramatic breakthrough, which would increase our numbers substantially, the system's growing police powers would eventually paralyze us. Well, we've made the breakthrough now, and we've got the potential, at least for some very substantial growth. There are some 12 million people under our control in the Los Angeles metropolitan area alone. How large the total population base we have to draw from is still not clear because of the anomalous situation in Northern California. Under direct organization control at this moment is a strip of California which runs from the Mexican border to about 150 miles northwest of Los Angeles, and from the coast inland for a distance varying from 50 to 100 miles. Included in this strip are San Diego, Los Angeles, and all important Vandenberg Air Force Base. The Sierras and the Mojave Desert form a natural eastern boundary to our territory. In a further coastal strip, which runs almost to the Oregon border and includes San Francisco and Sacramento, an anti system military faction seems to be running things. But I gather that our own authority has not yet been established there, and the states of Oregon and Washington appear to be still firmly under system control, contrary to earlier rumors. Elsewhere in the country, things are in a general uproar and our hit and run raids are continuing, but the system is in no immediate danger of collapsing. The main problem worrying the government seems to be whether or not it can trust its own armed forces. As a consequence of this worry, troops in some areas are still confined to their bases, even though they are badly needed to restore order among the civilian population. In some of the worst areas of civilian rioting, primarily because of the disruption of food supplies, the government is using special military units made up of non whites only. They've rushed some of these all Negro units into the border area around our California enclave. The closest such unit seems to be in Barstow, about 100 miles northwest of here. Some white refugees from here have been trickling into our area, and their reports are pretty sickening. Mass rape and terror from the black troops, who are lording it over the local whites. I hate to hear of such things happening to white people, but the reaction can only be favorable to us. And it's good that we've forced the system to show its lack of confidence in the loyalty of the white population and its dependence on non white elements. What's most important for us now, though, is that the government isn't trying to force its way into our territory. Our Vandenberg threat is holding them off for the moment, although that situation certainly won't last forever. But at least it gives us a chance to try to get our civilian population under control here. And what a mess things are in. There are more fires than ever, and rioting has become widespread. We simply don't have enough people, even including all the military personnel nominally on our side now, to maintain order while we restore essential utilities and set up an emergency food distribution system. We have altogether about 40,000 armed forces personnel at our disposal. Nearly two-thirds of them in the metro area here, and the other third scattered from San Diego to Vandenberg. It is a ticklish situation, though, because they outnumber organization members in this area about 20 to 1, which is actually not half as bad a ratio as I had thought earlier, but still quite bad enough. The great majority of these troops owe no loyalty to the organization and, in fact, do not realize that their orders are coming from us. So far, we have been keeping them busy day and night, and they haven't had time to ask too many questions. Organization members have been assigned to every military unit, from the company level up, and Henry, whom I saw again briefly last night, seems to think we've got a pretty good grip on them. I hope so. I have had a chance to chat with a few of the troops we have been using for fuel recovery and utility repair crews. They seem to be impressed by three facts. The government in Washington has totally lost control out here, that the blacks, both inside the military and outside, are a dangerous and unreliable element, and that they, with weapons and food, are a lot better off than the civilian population right now. But ideologically, they are in poor shape. Some of them are vaguely on our side. Others are still chock full of system brainwashing, and most are somewhere in between. The one thing that's keeping them in line now is the total absence of any alternate source of authority here. The system hasn't even gotten around to broadcasting appeals for loyalty aimed at our troops, probably because that would constitute an admission to the rest of the country just how big our win here has been. The official system line at the moment is that the situation is well under control, and the racist gangsters in California, that's us, will soon be rounded up or liquidated. Since we have been broadcasting appeals to revolt aimed at their troops all day and night, and have also been giving a picture of the situation here much rosier than it actually is, the system's story sounds pretty hollow. Instead of denying our claims, the system has simply started jamming our broadcasts, which is probably their shrewdest course. July 14th. The first substantial shipment of food entered the metro area today. A convoy of 60 odd big tractor trailers full of fresh produce from San Joaquin Valley. They unloaded at 30 emergency distribution points we've now got manned in the white sections. But it was like trying to fill the ocean with a thimble. We need at least 5 times as much food every day just to maintain the white population at a bare subsistence level. There are still large stocks of non perishable food in warehouses here, even though all the grocery stores have been looted bare. As soon as we're a little better organized and have located and inventorized it all, we can use this warehoused food to supplement the incoming fresh food. Meanwhile, there have been nasty incidents at several warehouses where we've had to shoot a number of people who wouldn't take no for an answer. The really nasty business is what we're running into in the black and racially mixed areas. Though I've spent the last 2 days directing salvage crews in areas which the troops have just finished clearing. The job of the troops is to separate the blacks from the rest of the population and confine them in controlled access areas until they can be convoyed out of our enclave. It's done in a quite simple and straightforward manner. A black holding area is designated, having been chosen for its proximity to a freeway heading east and for the ease with which all exits from the area can be blocked. Tanks and machine gun crews take up positions at these exits. Then a sweep through surrounding neighborhoods begins, converging on the designated holding area. Groups of infantry are preceded by sound trucks which repeatedly broadcast an announcement such as all blacks must assemble immediately for food and water supplies at the Martin Luther King Elementary School on 47th Street. Any north of 43rd Street after 1 p.m. will be shot on sight. All must assemble. At first, groups of blacks tried to stand their ground and defy the troops, apparently under the impression that the honkies wouldn't actually shoot them. Note to the reader, honky was one of many derogatory slang terms referring to a white person, which was used by the Negroes in the 3 decades prior to the Great Revolution. Its origin is uncertain. They discovered their mistake quite soon, however, and the word spread quickly. Most blacks moved along the streets leading into the designated areas a block or two ahead of the slowly advancing infantry, who made quick searches of each building as they came abreast of it. Blacks who had not already vacated the premises were roughly driven into the streets at bayonet point. If they put up any resistance at all, they were shot on the spot, and the sound of this occasional gunfire helped to keep the other blacks moving along. There have so far been only about half a dozen instances of blacks with contraband firearms barricading themselves in buildings and shooting at our troops. Whenever this happens, the troops bypass the occupied building and call in a tank, which riddles the building with cannon and machine gun fire. Once again, it's a damned good thing the civilian population was disarmed by the system years ago. If more blacks had guns, there'd be no way we could deal with them, considering the disparity in numbers. My salvage crews move in right behind the infantry. Our job is to inventory and secure all essential supplies and faculties, gasoline and bulk quantities of other fuels, non perishable food, medical supplies, heavy transport vehicles, certain industrial facilities, etc. The blacks have pretty well cleaned out all the food in their areas, and they've mindlessly destroyed a lot of other things we're looking for. Although we are finding a lot of things they've missed, including more than 40 tons of dried fish meal in a pet food plant just this morning. The stuff doesn't taste very good, but this one batch will supply the minimum protein requirements of 100,000 people for a week. And yesterday we ran across 30,000 gallons of liquid chlorine, which is needed for water purification. We also recovered most of the drug inventories of a hospital and two clinics in which the drug storerooms were still intact even after rioting. Blacks had ransacked the building. We also found gruesome evidence of one way in which the blacks had solved their food shortage: cannibalism. They began by setting up barricades in one main street to stop cars driven by whites, apparently as early as Tuesday of last week. The unfortunate whites were dragged from their cars, taken into a nearby black restaurant, butchered, cooked, and eaten. Later, the blacks organized hunting parties and made raids into white areas. In the cellar of one black apartment building, we found a scene of indescribable horror, attesting to the success of these raids. I and a crew of my men noticed a commotion in front of the building. As we finished checking the looted shambles of an adjacent warehouse and came out onto the street, a group of GIs milling around the entrance were obviously distressed about something. One of them came running out of the apartment building and began retching and vomiting on the sidewalk. Then another, with a grim expression on his face, led a young white girl out of the building. Was about 10 years old, naked, filthy, and in an obvious state of shock. As soon as I pushed my way into the building, I recoiled from the horrible stench which permeated the place. Putting a handkerchief over my nose and mouth didn't seem to help, but with the aid of my flashlight, I descended the cellar stairs past two more GIs who were coming up. In the arms of one of them was a silently staring white child of about 4, alive but apparently too weak to walk. The cellar, which was illuminated by two kerosene lanterns hanging from steam pipes, had been converted into a human slaughterhouse by the blacks in the apartment building. The floor was slippery with half coagulated blood. There were wash tubs full of stinking entrails and others filled with severed heads. 4 tiny human haunches dangled overhead from wires. On a wooden workbench beneath one of the lanterns, I saw the most terrible thing I had ever seen. It was the butchered and partially dismembered body of a teenage girl. Her blue eyes stared emptily at the ceiling, and her long golden hair was matted with the blood which had rushed from the gaping wound in her throat. I retched and stumbled back up the stairs and out into the light again. I could not make myself go back into that awful cellar, but I sent two of my crew with cameras and a light down there to make a thorough photographic record. The photos will be used for troop indoctrination. From one of the GIs outside the building, I learned that parts of at least 30 children, all white, had been found in the cellar, along with the two who were still alive. They had been tied to a pipe in one corner. In the rear courtyard of the building was an improvised barbecue grill and a large pile of small human bones, thoroughly gnawed. We took photographs of the courtyard too. I have been working in mostly black areas, but I have also heard some pretty bad stories from our people who have been in white and Chicano areas. No cases of cannibalism by whites or Chicanos have been reported. The blacks are a race apart in this respect, but there's been a lot of killing and fights over food. And there have been some grisly atrocities where gangs of blacks have invaded white areas and taken over the white homes, especially in the wealthier districts, where the homes are more isolated from other. On the positive side, in some of the predominantly white middle class and working class neighborhoods, whites have banded together to protect themselves from incursions by blacks and Chicanos. This is a refreshing development, but surprising in view of the way the morons out here have been voting in recent years. Is it possible that years of brainwashing have failed to take hold? Actually, I'm afraid it has taken hold in all too many cases. In the racially mixed neighborhoods, for example, the whites have suffered terribly in the last 10 days, and they've made virtually no effort to protect themselves. Without guns, of course, self defense is pretty much a matter of numbers and the will to survive. Although the whites are badly outnumbered in only a few mixed neighborhoods, they seem to have lost the feeling of identity and unity which the blacks and Chicanos still have. Most of all, though, many of them seem to be convinced that any effort at self defense would be racist, and they fear being thought of as racist or thinking of themselves that way, more than they fear death. Even when gangs of blacks took their children away or raped their women before their eyes, they offered no significant resistance. Really sick. It's hard for me to feel sorry for whites who won't even try to protect themselves. And it's even harder for me to understand why we should take chances and knock ourselves out to save such brainwashed scum from the fate they richly deserve. And yet it is in the mixed areas that we're having the most trouble and taking the most chances. We are reluctant to fire on crowds where we may kill whites as well as non whites. And the bastards apparently realize this and are taking advantage of it. In some neighborhoods, we're meeting so much opposition that it's nearly impossible to achieve our goal of separating the various racial groups into enclaves. Another big problem in trying to achieve racial separation is that so many people in this area cannot easily be classified as white or non white. The process of mongrelization has gone so far in this country that there are so many swarthy, frizzy haired characters of all sizes and shapes running around that no one doesn't know where to draw the line. Nevertheless, we've got to draw the line somewhere and soon. There is no way we can feed everybody in our area. If we're to avoid mass starvation among the whites, we must separate them into clearly defined areas soon, where electricity, water, food, and other essentials are available. And we must move everyone else out of our area, one way or another. The longer we delay, the more unruly the public will become. Actually, we have done pretty well at concentrating. About 80% of them are sealed in 4 small enclaves now. And I understand that the first mass convoy of them is heading east tonight. But for the rest, about all we've really done is immobilize the population so they can't move from one neighborhood to another. We certainly don't have them under control, and so far as I'm aware, we've not even begun mass arrests or taken any other action against other hostile elements yet. Let's get on with this now.